start.
The audio is fine, right, Fred?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Good.
Okay. Fabio, when you are ready.
Okay. Give me 10 more seconds.
Yep.
We are already live on YouTube. Now we are on Facebook. Just a moment. Okay, Luca, we are live.
All right. Welcome everyone to this new webinar with the Consumer Choice Center. It's our great pleasure as with us Professor Michele Boldrin, who is a professor of economy at the St. Louis University in Washington. At the Washington University in St. Louis, and debating on IP with Fred Roeder, with our managing director. Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Fred, for being here. So IP has been lately intellectual property has been one of the most important topics in the last few years, especially when it comes to everything related to pharmaceutical products and not only, and also copyright, which can cover all of the audiovisual or publishing sector as well. Lately this week, the commissioner, European Commissioner Hogan has said that there will be compulsory licensing when any vaccination for the coronavirus, for the SARS-CoV-19, will be found by any pharmaceutical company. Will it be it's American, European, or Chinese? Michele and Professor Boldrin and Fred have, I would say, different opinions when it comes to intellectual property, and this debate is concentrating on trying to understand both of them and trying to see if also among the liberal ideologies and liberal professors there can be a touch base on this very important topic. So let's start. And just for your information, at the end of you can also use the button on Q&A. And at the end of the webinar, there will be time for the panelists to reply to your questions. Professor Boldrin, let's start with you. In many cases, intellectual property is said to boost innovation, and you argued, and you also argue right now that is not the case. Can you explain us why you believe that intellectual property is actually against innovation and actually doesn't boost, but actually block it?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the invitation. Nice meeting you, Fred. And I will try to be super brief, then we'll go into the details. Otherwise, the debate is not lively. The reason why I claim that, and David Levine claims that, given that at least the academic work on the topic we co-authored together since more than 20 years ago, is very simple, because the data and history shows that. They both show that. From a theoretical point of view, we can go to the theory later if you're interested. Economic theory suggests either way. You can build up theoretical argument, that is models, in which intellectual property create an incentive for innovation, and yet you can create theoretical models in which intellectual property is not an incentive for innovation, and in fact is damaging, and in which instead competition, imitation, free entry is an incentive to innovation. In some sense, the second model is older than the first. It's Marshall model of a competitive industry, And obviously, I think historically it's worked very well. It's one of the best tools we have to understand how industries work when there is free entry and competition. The second model is usually attributed to Schumpeter. There is a bit of mistake there. It should be attributed to the second Schumpeter, the old one, the one that was terrorized by communist Stalinism and had spent way too much time in Harvard, Cambridge, and Massachusetts, and had forgotten the dynamic genial guy that in 1911 wrote the theory of economic development and changed the way economic theories look at growth forever. Because in that book, instead, it's competition, quite correctly, where he's describing what's going on at the beginning of the 20th century that drives innovation. But as I said, you can have theoretical arguments either way. What you don't have is data. So much data that the data are so much against intellectual property that among people that believe in intellectual property and think and are attached to the second Schumpeter model, the one in which monopoly power is an incentive for innovation, they've been discussing for now almost 2 decades, a decade and a half, the so-called patent puzzle. Outcomes that with all these patents, with all this dramatic increase in intellectual property, with all this strengthening of intellectual property, with its enormous diffusion international, with the fact that we have imposed through WTO and WIPO our rules of intellectual property to the rest of the world, and in fact made them much more extensive and included more and more sectors and activities behind patents and copyright, we don't have an explosion of productivity. In fact, we have quite the opposite. That's the puzzle. The puzzle to David, me, and others that have been working on this as a quick answer because it hurts. And the problem here, and I close, is to understand that the argument has to be given from a general equilibrium point of view. Any argument that is given from the point of view of the single innovator or the single firm or the single large company that actually has patents or controls copyright is fallacious. Because yes, it's a systemic effect, like competition. As Adam Smith taught us, competition is not good for the individual entrepreneur. The individual entrepreneur wants to be a monopolist. Always wanted, always will. Pretty human. For the very same reason that he's there and he's doing what he's doing because he wants to make some money and get some success and be good and be big and be the first, he will obviously love to be the one and only. And so the only way to understand the argument is to look at the systemic problem, and at the data, the historical data, not the individual point of view.
Okay, thank you, Michele. Fred, do you want to argue on this? I have also another question. You are an health economist, and one of the main topics, as I said before, about patents is in the pharmaceutical company. So can you explain us on your point of view how pharmaceutical company have benefits, and especially R&D have benefits in the pharma sector, have benefits from patents and from intellectual property?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Boldrin, and thank you, Luca, for facilitating this debate. First of all, I'm really excited to have this debate today, having this with a very distinguished economics professor who understands markets, because in many cases when I have this debate or when I write in favor of intellectual property as a safeguard for innovation, I'm debating with people who even reject the existence of markets or that markets should not be free. And therefore debate is usually basically by me yelling, do you want to have the Soviet Union that was not innovative? And I'm very excited to have an extremely sophisticated market economist we can share some ideas with today. And I had the great pleasure, Professor Boldrin, also to read some chapters of your book. I have to be honest, I didn't read the whole book against intellectual property, mainly due to time constraints. But I think we're not too far away from each other in many analysis of problems we have with regulated economies. I would also agree that we should not look at the profitability of a few large companies and say, hey, it works for these companies. They can pay annual dividends, but we should look at innovation and what is the best tool to safeguard innovation. And I would first say that right now we are only able to cure 5% of all known diseases in the world. We know about 10,000 diseases, and we're only really able to cure about 500. So it's not that we're at the end of the need of medical innovation. And I, as a health economist, I mainly focus on medical innovation, but I'm also happy to discuss copyrights, audiovisual regulations, and also the field of patents in other industries. But we definitely see that there's a need for innovation in healthcare. We're getting older. We're seeing new diseases that emerge later, and we're just able to identify more diseases. And I personally think it's a good public policy perspective to create an incentive system that incentivizes tackling these diseases and treat them or even be able to cure them. I'm aware of the fact that in the past, countries with very lax intellectual property or patent regimes, so in the absence of patents for chemicals or pharmaceutical drugs, were still able to innovate. But by going into that debate, I would also say scientific research in 2020 looks very different than in 1900 or 1870s, when you could sit in a small garage in Leverkusen and develop aspirin. I mean, if we go into genetic therapies, immunotherapies, a good example is, for instance, Zolgensma, currently the world's most expensive drug, distributed and marketed by Novartis, which, depending on which country you are, costs for a lifetime cycle treatment. You get it, I think, 2 doses, and that cures you from a very nasty rare disease, which usually kills you in the first 18 months of being alive. That costs between $1 to $2 million. And getting such drugs to the market is extremely expensive. And I'm worried that if we make the case against intellectual property, we'll see 2 things. First of all, the general welfare gains will be very positive, because everyone suddenly has access to all drugs, and they can be produced at the prices of generics, which in most cases will drastically reduce the price for the drug. But I am really concerned that this would put us in an innovative stalemate, because who would invest billions? And now I think right now it's between 1.5 and $2 billion, which I estimated the price of bringing a drug to the market. That includes the cost of failed attempts to develop a drug, right? Because it's not just, we should not just look at one drug a company tried to bring to the market, but also all the substances they first maybe synthesized, started like with 5,000 different attempts of finding a drug, and one of them actually turns out to be effective and then even approved by global regulators. So I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that companies would do that, with knowing that probably after a time frame of a year it takes a competitor to reverse engineer this drug, they're able to make actually a return on invest on this. Probably what has also changed over the last decades and the last century is you used to be able to have a chemical product and you could just say, this is a trade secret, we don't tell anyone what's in there. I mean, these days, labs and even small laboratories got so sophisticated that it's very quick to just analyze the molecular compounds of a drug and reverse engineer it. So this was definitely an advantage back in the days when chemical and pharmaceutical companies were just able to not tell anyone what compounds they're using. But this is technologically now pretty easy to bypass. Probably what we should also talk about today is it's a multifactorial problem, because I mean, in my field, and I know patents and drugs are not everything, but it's often a very visible field, and many advocates make a case against intellectual property and patents. The rising prices of drug costs is often used as an example why patents are bad. And I would make the case that rising drug costs are not due to patents, at least not mainly due to patents, but due to very cumbersome regulation of bringing a drug to the market. So I think that's maybe an intro statement, and then let's just dive into the debate and have a good exchange.
All right, thank you, Fred. Michele, do you want to
Zoom
reply
immediately
to
into it. Yes, pharmaceutical. And let me do it in a very, very quick way. First of all, yes, the fact that there is a lot of disease out there and very few drugs for it is one of the many factors showing that, in fact, patents don't work. And why? Well, because the mechanism is such that if you can get a very high rate of return on some diseases, cholesterol, high cholesterol, for example, blood pressure, things like that, well, you concentrate on that. You get your high rate of return. And why bother with vaccines? They give you a low rate of return. And you can probably not patent them because, as we can see with the COVID, if you only find a vaccine or you get near finding a vaccine for a serious disease, you will have governments and public opinion and all these damn people all over your neck asking for you to give up royalties and patents. So why bother? There is a gigantic literature showing the effect of that, and there is no doubt that that's the driving force. Point number one. Point number two, yes, creating new drugs has become very expensive, but that is exactly the point. And that's exactly the endogenous aspect. It's become very expensive because the cost, the labor cost, the cost of equipment and so on is particularly high. And why is it particularly high? Because there are the monopoly profits. All you have to do is just to compare income and cost of people operating in the medical and pharmaceutical sector in the United States to the rest of the world, where patent reigns sovereign and where the monopoly of the American Medical Association, the most powerful trade unions that have ever existed, ever will exist, I hope, for humanity, dominates the market. The high rate of return is completely endogenous. The gigantic cost is completely endogenous. Yes, there is the regulation, there is the clinical trial, exactly. But the clinical trials are actually an instrument of the patent system. I have tried for many years now, even after becoming not friends. One told me one day, well, you must be communist. So acquainted with fairly high executive. This one in particular was the former CEO of Pfizer when Pfizer was really very big. Nice guy. But hey, his point of view is, well, whatever is good for Pfizer is good for me. I used to be called Monsanto at the time when it included both. And I've been trying to find data, good data, in trying to break down the costs of producing drugs. Have you ever obtained one? No. There's no pharmaceutical company, no pharmaceutical association that will ever release those cost structure, even after anonymizing. We have a lot of studies. They all come from the pharmaceutical industry. They all come from economists working for the pharmaceuticals and being financed from the pharmaceuticals. We have tried for more than a decade, requesting worldwide data, micro data on the cost structure. Never got a blink. Never got anything. Wow. And finally, let's look at another thing. The problem there, we all say there is a huge risk. Well, it depends. One of the proposals I advanced was the following. So the concentration of research right now is in the United States, not just because the patent system here protects it, because United States, because the research center in the United States are much better than elsewhere. Not everywhere, not always. Germany is pretty strong on this sector, and so are actually the Japanese, and even the Italian used to be when they had a bit of competition. There was no, well, you understand, up to 1978, there were no patents of medicines in Italy, and the pharmaceutical industry in Italy was actually innovative. So was the Swiss one, created without patents and against patents. So was the German one. So those are the facts of history. That dominating chemical industries in the world, the Swiss and the German, were created against patents, without patents. In fact, the Swiss one was created to run away from patents imposed in France. And the only way that the Anglo-Saxon and American chemical and pharmaceuticals have caught up with the Germans is because the Germans got themselves into Hitler in the World War II. And as a part of their repayment for losing the war, there was, well, give me your chemical industry, all of it. Scientists, know-how, plants, everything, the shoes, even the lady opening the door when you get to the headquarters. Let's transfer her too. Well, all right. So back to the main issue. We advanced the following proposal. Let's stop financing the research, which is no longer basic research, because right now in the United States, NIH finances research labs all over the country, in hospitals, in universities like mine. My university has one of the best medical research center in the world. and also in companies. When something works and get closer to something that could be patented and as a market potential, there is zero risk in that. And scientists just do that. The leading scientists just are big businessmen writing a research proposal for millions of dollars because the people they have to hire cost a fortune. And because the restriction on entry in the US academic market and medical market in particular are such that they increase those salaries. I mean, the cost of a junior researcher in the United States today is higher than the cost of a senior, as they call it, primario, top of the career doctor in a country like Italy, Spain, and France, where the quality of medicine is at least not inferior to the one in the United States. And we have to look at data, it's probably superior. Okay, so let's actually focus on the issues here because the costs are there. One thing is to pay a junior guy $200,000 and it costs you on top of that. And one thing is to pay $200,000 for a senior food. So what if we do the opposite? What if we don't let this research to be carried out by companies, and then we use the NIH funds to finance the clinical trials, and then we make the result of the clinical trial public, and we get rid of the patents, leaving a patents of 5-7 years there. Because if there is something that is a public good, is the information about the effectiveness of the drug and the fact that it's not damaging. That's a public good. And that's actually really a pure public good. It's just a piece of information that once you have it, it's very simple and everybody can use it. Whereas the basic research and deciding where to go and deciding if this disease or the other disease is more profitable, that's definitely not a public good.
Okay, if I may just respond to this quickly. I mean, when it comes to market entry barriers, especially of labor markets, I would fully agree that the cartel of medical researchers and also medical practitioners in the US, due to immigration policy, but also due to the cartel of the industry or the profession itself, is a cost driver, right? Because there's more demand than supply. So I fully agree, and that explains why medical doctor, even sometimes Germany compared to the US, the American doctor makes 3 times as much money with the same qualifications in the country with a similar wealth level, right? So that is, you can also see that with software developers in the US due to their very restrictive immigration policies, which are getting even more restrictive. A mediocre developer in San Francisco makes $250,000, and the person being smarter in Kiev, being also connected to the world, makes maybe $10,000. And he's like a software architect, right? And that's like a super high paid person in Ukraine. But I mean, we see that thanks to globalization and the fact that we can do more remote work, the United States, countries like the United States are starting to lose some competitiveness because of their restrictive labor market. So I would fully agree, but I would say this is what I try to call a multifactorial problem when we talk about market entry barriers and cost of healthcare and drugs. This is a policy that has nothing to do with the patent system, but with restrictive labor markets and cartels, job market cartels. I would also like to highlight that a lot of the research, I mean, big pharmaceutical companies, and that's no news, and many insiders in the pharmaceutical industry would also agree. In the years 2000 till 2010, there was this innovation crisis where you could see every other day in the Financial Times or in the Economist that the pipeline starts drying out for big pharmaceutical companies. This has changed a bit in the last 10 years. There's actually an upward trend that there are more innovative medicines hitting the market. It's also not just Me Too medicines, but it's also some groundbreaking drugs. We could see, especially like innovative companies like Gilead have disproven a bit that, it's a company started in the late 80s, and they have groundbreaking drugs on the market on HIV, on hepatitis. They tried to have something for Ebola. Now remdesivir is being used or tested for COVID-19. Still not really sure where this is going. I mean, different people say different things, but it seems that definitely it's possible for companies to enter this club of top 10, top 20 pharmaceutical companies where you have the scales to actually really invest in expensive research projects and also bring them to the market, because the bringing to the market cost and cutting through regulatory red tape in the US, Canada, Europe, Japan, Australia is where you need the scale. The research is often done more and more in biotech companies that are being acquired at some point or have joint ventures with these big companies, because the chief innovation officer of a big pharma company also knows that they need to have the agility and the risk-seeking and the non-corporate attitude of a biotech company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, compared to the very corporate ways you have maybe in the Basels and New Jerseys of the world, or Leverkusens. So that's definitely true. And I think our question should be how we can actually reduce the market entry barriers for an ideation of let's cure this disease, to bring this disease to the market and being the same company, not having to go through 3 different mergers and acquisitions in between. Because that's what we see, right? As a biotech company, you're rarely able to bring it to the market. And that's because of the different regulatory regimes around the world and the big bringing to market cost. And that's includes dealing with the FDAs of the world, the drug approval authorities, but also navigating regulations on how you can actually market your drug. I mean, the harder it is to talk to doctors and to market your drug, and dealing with wholesalers and pharmacies, the easier it is for the existing companies, of course, to keep their market share. And but that can all be done without, and I think it's the better way to ease market entry restrictions, but allowing a company to own their invention, and that's the patent at the end of the day. I mean, it would also, of course, be interesting to have this experiment. I'm not sure if we really want to go for it, but it's an experiment to say, okay, we have fully public funded research, and then we go in the open domain with this taxpayer funded research or philanthropically funded research, right? I mean, they are also, especially in the vaccine area, you see that in the Gates Foundation, which invests a lot in vaccines, but they want to then make them universally available, and compare that to fully venture capital funded and later on stock market funded medical research. Unfortunately, we don't really have, at least I'm not aware of, good data that shows like fully just publicly funded and fully privately funded research. If you would be a communist, Professor Boldrin, I would say the Soviet Union was not innovative in bringing drugs to the market. I actually looked at it, there was not much they brought to the market in their 70 years of existence. Some surgical procedures they were good in because they had to deal with scarcity, had to figure out how to do an open heart surgery with very little means. But when it comes to
you're not going to join this guy with a communist story, because then I start to get my teeth out.
No, yes. No, I don't want to.
The reduction at communism in an argument like this is totally equivalent to the reduction at Hitlerorum in others. So.
Yes. And I said, I absolutely acknowledge you're coming from a market-driven perspective. So that's
one.
So
go on, finish. I just made a joke.
Oh, no. So, I mean, my point was that we see drivers of cost for and barriers to market entry. And I mean, ideally would have as much innovation in the biotech industry as in the social media or dating platform industry, right? But we don't have that. Like the IT industry and also the entertainment industries have been like much better and quickly at changing.
Let me use that to throw myself a question. To me, the answer is obvious. And it's to look at this problem from another point of view. We have a gigantic debate. Economists, actually, people say economists ignore it. Economists started talking about this when I was just starting my career. That was almost 40 years ago, but without almost, in some sense. I guess it's exactly 40 years ago that I finished my military service and I said, I'm going to become an academic. I'm going to change life and just do that, okay? So, and I discovered soon after I went to graduate school in '83 that there was already some frontier research looking at that, which has to do with income inequality, growing income inequality, right? The first signs had been apparent in the United States since a few years before, and people started working on that and trying to understand what it was going on. So now we know it's the debate, it's roaring, it's everywhere. And when you look at that debate and you look at the data that creates some of the indices, you realize that I haven't done the exact calculation, but I've done some. I would say 70, 80% of the increase in inequality has to do with two things. Gigantically high labor incomes, that is, things that are payment to people providing their labor, their time in some sectors, and huge capital gains through shares that essentially turn into a tradable object, the product of, again, human time. And where is this concentrated? In 4 sectors, 3 of them you mentioned: medical at large, IT, entertainment. The 4th is finance. All 4 of them are dominated by intellectual property. The finance one less than the other, matter of fact, but even the finance has started. And are certainly characterized by very oligopolistic market structure, either endogenously, partly, I have to admit. And this is a big problem, I mean, for which there's no easy solution. I mean, not everything depends on intellectual property. The fact that there are some scalability factors, and then if Google has the best research engine, Google has the best research engine. There's nothing you can damn do about it, and it's not even patented because the core part is just a secret of the company, well-kept secret. I mean, they have millions of patents all around, but the core code is actually not patented quite correctly. Approving an old theorem of Drew Freudenberg and I think Jean Tirole, or just Drew or David, that was pointed out long ago. So that should make us think, right? If we look at the core part of where this income inequality is coming, it's actually coming from those sectors, and it's clearly tied to the existence of intellectual property. Not only patents, even copyright. I mean, the idea that your average rapper, with all respect for people like hip hop and stuff, I mean, I find it as boring as anything goes. But anyhow, I'm sure they're geniuses and artists and of great relevance. Schoenberg and Beethoven were nothing compared to them. But the fact that those guys need to have a net worth between 500 million and $1.5 billion to hip hop, I don't know how I say it beats my economic intuition. You know, John Lennon, the Rolling Stones did it for a lot less. Not sure Maria Ciccone needed all that money to become Madonna. I think the opportunity cost was a lot lower than $1 billion. This applies to that. And this is the argument as far as economic efficiency is concerned. Let's never forget that. The argument about economic efficiency, the argument in favor of having markets is not ideological, at least not for people like me. I don't see any ideological or principled value behind markets. As long as they work better than the alternative, I'm all in favor. When they start working worse than the alternative, then I start thinking of the alternative. And so the strongest argument about market and competition and private initiative is what? People do good things at their opportunity cost. This reduces social cost of obtaining good things, increases people's welfare, that we call consumer surplus, but it's actually people's welfare. Okay? And when I see those numbers, I say, oh my God, I'm so far away from opportunity cost here that something is wrong. Somewhere in the chain, something is wrong. And this applies to the hip hopper and applies also to the medical research. And as Fred correctly pointed out, to the modest programmer in San Jose or Palo Alto or Mountain View.
Okay, thank you, Michele. So I will throw 3 questions now, but I want to be the advocate of the devil here. So the first one is for Fred, actually. I think Michele has a good point when he says that a way to actually, the problem is the concentration of the industry and the fact that there are no innovation. But one of the main points that we have at the Consumer Choice Center is that to fast track innovation, especially when it comes to patents for the, let's say, all of the pharmaceutical drugs and new drugs, is actually fast tracking the clinical trials, fast tracking certain type of drugs. Do you think this could be a way to find a compromise between your vision and Michele's vision, so that if let's say the pharmaceutical industry will reach the break even and probably the profit much earlier than spending 6, 7, even 2 years, or 6, 7 months, 2 years, or even more, depending on the drugs, on a clinical trial, and fast tracking this could actually make it easier for the industry to actually lose the patent earlier. What do you think? Let's for Fred. I will come to you, Michele, later with other questions.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you usually have a 20-year patent protection, which then you can also prolong by a couple of years, depending which market you're in. In Europe, that's called supplementary protection certificate. The US has a different name. But in average, it takes between 8 to 10 years between filing the patent and getting the drug to the patient. And that, I think, no matter if you're in favor of intellectual property or against intellectual property, that's first of all potentially bad news for patients, because we might already know that something can cure or can improve your condition, but you still don't have access to it. Obviously, I'm not fully against approval processes and clinical trials, because it would also be dangerous just to give any sort of potentially promising drug to patients and it kills them or even worsens their condition. But we should definitely think if we cannot fast track the approval of drugs. We should also think on whether doctors and patients should have more rights to opt out of that approval process and just be able to take some risk on their own shoulders after certain levels of medical consultation, because sometimes patients don't even have the time to wait. I don't know, it's like then compassionate use, and this is gradually being developed, which is good. We see this more and more happening. The US also passed a right to try legislation about 2 years ago. We've actually worked a bit on this. It could be more comprehensive. Obviously, also the industry is always worried that these laws do not fully limit or free them from liability claims later on. Right? This is also, of course, a question. Like, I mean, liability laws are also frightening, and especially tort law in the US frightens drug companies, because on the one hand, they have to go through this FDA approval process, but then there's still state law that makes them, even though the FDA has said this drug is safe, state laws still open them to multi-billion lawsuits. So that's definitely also something at the end of the day patients have to pay, because these companies need to recoup their legal fees and fines they have to pay, which is often billions. But probably like the easiest way to just say, okay, let's reduce some costs is, why don't we have a global or at least OECD level mutual recognition of approvals? Shouldn't be enough if the FDA first approves a drug, or shouldn't be enough if the European Medicines Agency has approved one? Why do companies need to seek approval in different regional parts of the world? I mean, that also just delays access for patients. It increases the amount of money a drug company has to make in a shorter time frame with that drug being patent protected. So yes, there are ways to get drugs faster to patients and reduce also the cost of bringing the drug to the market, because delays, I mean, you have, of course, an interest rate on this, on the initial investment. Staff is still working on this. Law firms and regulatory departments and companies have to deal with all of this. I mean, that costs money.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Michele, before you reply to Fred, if you want, I have a question for you on copyright. As you mentioned, copyright, actually. I could understand the copyright when it comes to, for example, your position when it comes to, for example, European Union. I mean, in European Union, we still have geo-blocking on audiovisual, when we should have a single market which covers everything. So I cannot watch the same movie in UK or in Italy or in France because of the geo-blocking. But when it comes to publishing, actually, like books or even scientific articles, how do you what's your position when it comes, for example, to books? I mean, most of the authors rely on the royalties that the publishing company gets thanks to the copyright and the use of a trademark. Thinking about Harry Potter, where the author became really rich thanks to this, thanks to the trademark Harry Potter, actually. So I'm very curious to understand your position when it comes to copyright, not on audiovisual. I believe that CCC and you have more or less the same idea when it comes to audiovisuals, especially considering that it's very complicated, let's say, copy. Most of the movies are now exactly the same, but it's very difficult actually copying the same name of a movie, and nobody will actually go and see it anyway. So the geo-blocking and all of the parts of the audiovisual, we believe, but when it comes to publishing and authors of articles, also newspapers article. I mean, if you think about the op-eds, most of the op-eds are paid in base of royalties that the newspaper is actually getting. So I'm actually curious to hear your opinion on this, and if you want to reply to Fred as well.
No, so let me actually do the reverse of what you asked, because I think I actually tend to agree with Fred, and let me be very straight and clear. We made it clear in the book we wrote. At this point, it's almost 20 years ago that we thought about the book and published 12. If we were serious, if I were more serious, David is a very serious guy. I am the lazy and involved in a million other things. One is the true academic. No, and I'm not kidding. This is actually true. He's the true academic. I'm a bit of a joke. I do academic when I feel like, and then I do other things when I feel like. It's the problem of having gone to the Italian Lyceum and feeling that Renaissance man is the way you want to be, and not just do economics. I'll try to practice it, and the result has been good for me, but people look at me with kind of a puzzle eyes. I mean, anyhow, the book, if you look at it, is very clear. It says, look, this is an economic analysis, and this is the theoretical analysis. This is the principle. Then there is policy. And as far as policy is concerned, I'm not saying overnight we'll abolish patents. I don't think we should ever abolish patents. I think that a patent term of 5 years is perfectly reasonable, and it's something we should look at. And I think a lot of the stuff that Fred has been mentioning, the approach we should all take, and I would be happy to find the energy to get involved again in that debate, is to recognize that the system as it is now is broken. And it's not just a matter of patents, it's a matter of a very complex worldwide equilibrium that has built itself over the last half century around the patent system, around regulatory rules in the specific case of pharmaceutical, and around national protectionist, mercantilist attitude in this or the other industry. And they vary. But for example, the argument obviously for drugs, I agree with you, that makes no sense to have all this different form of approval, right? Aspirin is aspirin. And by the way, aspirin was invented absent patents and not patented in Germany because patents were forbidden. There is a nice list in our book of the 50, according to the British Medical Association, top medical innovation of the last century. And I think 47 of them were invented without patents. Only 3 were invented with patents. So I think that that's a kind of debate that should be fostered. And I'm all in favor for thinking at reasonable, serious paths to reform the system, because it's showing its inadequacy from every point of view. And soon also from the point of view of the investor, I believe. Copyright, look, it's very simple. It's very, very simple. Authors in general don't make money from books. Academic authors make zero money from books to start with. I mean, Cambridge was very nice. Our book had about 500,000 copies downloaded for free from the PDF on various sites. And I think sold 10,000 copies or 15,000 copies worldwide, even if it has been translated. If you have some of the translation there in many languages, including Korean, Japanese, Turkish, and so on. Okay? So your average author essentially writes the book for the fun of it, for the degree of complementary income he gets or she gets from advertisement and so on, and writes it mostly for passion. Notoriously, the fact that some of them become multimillionaires, it's a strange lottery. I mean, the famous author of Harry Potter would have written Harry Potter even if she had been announced that you make $500,000 out of this and not $500 million. Okay, what happens to authors of novels and things like that is exactly what happens to performers in the arts. Most of it, you do it for the passion. It's a good life. It's a very good life. It beats the alternative no matter what. Okay, so what is the copyrights are for? Copyrights are for sustaining an obsolete industry, which made sense a century ago. Even then, there was fight on copyrights. I mean, it's very interesting to look at the fight on copyrights in England and elsewhere, the printers and so on, when copyrights was first introduced. That right now, it's just very expensive because it's very inefficient and it's anti-technological progress and defends jobs that make no sense anymore. This is true also for newspaper. Newspaper waste their money in a plethora of superstar journalists and bureaucratic apparatus and structures inside that are completely devoid of any meaning, that serves no purpose other than paying huge salaries to the people that has managed to get that. This would require analysis sector by sector. So, but the reason is very simple. It's this. The opportunity cost of producing those things, especially today, especially given that technology, absolutely does not justify copyright that as of now is eternal. Can you tell me what is the incentive that we get from a continuous copyright on Mickey Mouse? Should be expiring soon, by the way. Is there any movement from the Walt Disney Corporation to extend it one more time?
I'm not sure about that, but I know that it expired already, actually, because it's expired in May 2020. So I'm not sure if they actually
all right, yeah,
no, but it expired.
Yeah, it was 20 years and it was in 2000. So this time they've given up. There you go. We lost the forecast. We were pretty sure they would have tried again.
Sorry about that.
To buy copies, yet another extension. Because after all, the Constitution says for a limited amount of time. It doesn't say how long the limited has to be. It could easily be a century.
So actually, we have a lot of questions for our audience, and we are running out of time. So I will close with the questions. First question is actually on China. So for both of you, actually, China is one of the countries which which does not restrict, let's say, IP, and actually most of the time it's actually copying from other countries and for patented technology.
Look, let me interrupt. It's no longer true. This is just a delay in information, like India with the pharmaceutical. This was true 25 years ago. This is absolutely not true now. It's not. I mean, it's not even worth debating.
Okay.
I don't know what
I would actually agree. There has been. I mean, there's still some weaknesses, but there definitely, if you look at the last 20 years, there has been increase of at least enforcement of domestic patents. Then sometimes maybe there's strategic reasons why some American patents are not being honored, but this is more like maybe national defense and tech where there's a strategic interest. But if you're Louis Vuitton and you have your trademark or your pattern registered with the Chinese Patent Office, and someone fakes it and they find that person, usually there is some enforcement. It's maybe not as strong as the US or Germany, but it exists. So, and that's just, you can see that in any emerging market. Yeah.
Let me actually add one thing to that, because it's very interesting that people keep thinking at China, the copier and so on. The Chinese, once they did the initial jump where you imitate, like everybody else, every second camera imitated, every second camera copied, including the United States. The United States had no copyright until the end of the 19th century. The United States copied stuff, even patented stuff from England, from the United Kingdom, for the whole 18th and 19th century, for a good part of the 19th century, exactly like China. In fact, China's copied for a shorter amount of time, much shorter, no comparison, which makes sense. I mean, information moves faster, blah, blah, blah. So, but anyhow, they're all complying. And let me tell you what the issue is. We will soon see China become the strongest world advocate of enforced and stronger property rights on intellectual property. Why? Because they'll start to be those controlling it. And then my forecast is maybe the Western world will start thinking again that maybe it's not a natural right.
Okay, so two questions from our colleague Bill. One is if you would like to discuss an anecdote that Thomas Jefferson in 1787 was opposed to patents and absolutely opposing to monopolies. And 2 years later, he actually changed his mind, saying that the intellectual property had given a spring to innovation behind his conception. I believe what Bill wants to ask is if he wants to comment on this, if you believe that, maybe this is for Michele actually, if you believe that Thomas Jefferson changed his mind because he actually saw greatest things coming out from patented patents, or actually just changed his mind because he was a politician. I don't know. But I mean, it was not actually a question, so I asked Bill if he had something else. Otherwise, I will make this question. Why do you believe actually Thomas Jefferson changed his mind in 2 years, which is actually very close time?
If I recall, there is actually a personal reason, but I guess the answer to that is buried with him. Why? You never ask why people change their mind if you cannot ask them directly, if you don't trust their answer. I suppose he was a politician. The two things together seem to fit the pattern. Point is that he lived in a country that was stealing and copying from all over the world. So,
fair enough. Question to Fred, also from Bill, is the defense of intellectual property is always seen as so-called patent trolls, which for the audience are very large corporation of lawyers who actually feel patents just because something, or actually say, oh, this thing was already patent, and they start lawsuits against company that just found an innovative thing. So can you address this point? Can you say what do you believe about this patent troll, and how can we actually, this is a question to both of you, can move forward with this issue?
Hey, so I didn't go to law school, and I'm very happy I didn't go to law school, because that gives me my eternal right to mock lawyers and question their relevance, and at least the significance of their relevance in society when it comes to welfare. So I mean, definitely, you can abuse any system, any sort of system, right? And some law firms have specialized on basically looking at. This is usually the case when you have the so-called cross-licensing agreements. So if you have two multinationals, I know you have Nokia and you have Ericsson. Probably Ericsson uses thousands of patents that are owned by Nokia, and Nokia uses thousands of patents used by Ericsson. And usually multinationals have agreements that they basically say, we don't look at each and every patent, we just allow that both of us basically pool these patents to use them, or allow each other to use them. And then sometimes when parts of a company get sold and some of these patents are suddenly hands of a private equity, or even law firms buying it out, just they can basically cause problems. That's definitely not a great thing, patent trolling, and I'm pretty much against it. Probably the patent system could be slightly adjusted, that you have to use a patent actually for the intended use of it and not just to kind of sue people. But this is also, if you look at liability law. So I'm not against tort law in the US, because it helps consumers to get compensated for damages they received from behavior caused by companies or people. But if you open the floodgates of it, if you allow basically everyone to use it, and there's not even really, you don't really have to bring the proof that you got hurt by that company, just use class action lawsuits, then it's a problem, right? So, and I think patent trolling patent trolls are just like a problem of the patent system, but they could probably be reformed away, or at least reduce their impact. So that's maybe even smarter patent contracts of cross-licensing could make it so that you can say, okay, we're allowed to use your license, and we exclude patent trolls ever getting back to us on this use. That's probably, private law can probably even do that.
Okay, thank you, Fred. One more question actually from Michele. Is from Christian. He posted on YouTube, so I'm just gonna read everything. We are a company focused on cutting-edge technology in the field of artificial intelligence and computer vision. We invest 100% of our revenue in research of new algorithms and software components. Usually, our clients remunerate us for IP acquisition. Clearly, they don't want us to sell the same tech to competitors. From a legal point of view, IP ownership or license is the only safe way. So in some sense, we would like to know how, in theory, if we don't have patents and if we don't have IP, how we will properly be remunerated and the client investment could be protected.
All right. Well, this is the classical question. If I answer it seriously, we'll go on for another half hour. So I will have to be brutal. All these questions belong to the so-called general equilibrium effect. We have to understand legal, organizational, economic, financial structure as of now in most industries where patents are relevant are built around the fact that there are patents. If you slowly remove them or reduce their terms, which is what we have advocated, that organization will modify itself. So, for example, a company like the one is describing might become an internal project working on prizes and bonuses on achievement of the client is talking about. That's just an hypothesis. I mean, that the organization will change. An old friend of David and I that is no longer here, and a great economist, Jack Hirschleifer, a great specialist of economics of information, wrote very long ago, I think 50 years ago, a paper on essentially around a variation of this question, which is the one argument I think that people find it, have found that it's strongly in favor of patent, which is the story of the small inventor. Now, the point is that the empirical relevance of the small inventor, which is what motivated Jefferson and Madison's attitude and Jefferson's change of mind, now to be serious, has become so negligible that even if I think the argument might have a degree of relevance, it's socially irrelevant purely for a statistical purpose. It's too small, okay? And we cannot make a whole system inefficient because we have 10 cases a year in which maybe that thing is worth it. It doesn't work that way, okay? But anyhow, the argument is I'm a small inventor. I invent something completely important. I go over to the big company that can use it because, and this is important, Schumpeter again, my invention is a good invention, but I don't have the economic, entrepreneurial, managerial, capital, technological ability to actually make that invention valuable. So it's valuable only because the other guy, big guy, exists. Fine, but I want to extract the profit from it. And here the first question you want to ask is how much? Because what was your opportunity cost of coming up with this little idea? But that's all right. Let's assume you're greedy, you want to make a lot of money. So you go to General Motors, start bargaining with General Motors. You don't have a patent, and eventually you have to reveal the invention. At that point that you reveal the invention, even if you got some prepayment because you reveal progressively, General Motors chits. They say, oh, thank you. We had promised you had a $10 million. Oh, yeah, no, but you know, sorry, we have to have coffee right now. We'll be back later. All right. Well, you know what you do at that point? You say, you know, GM, there is Ford next door. That's Jack's idea. Either you now dish 20 million to me, or I just walk over to Ford and then to Toyota and then to Volkswagen and then so on and so forth. And I just give them as a gift my invention. Because given that you like it and you took it away, I'm sure they'll like it too. So now do a quick calculation, see if your monopoly profits, your first mover advantage, you'll be imitated eventually. If your first mover advantage is worth $20 million or not, and just dish it out. That's one of the many creative ways in which markets solve this type of problem. One point about markets is that they adapt. So the rules of the game and the way we work as we know them now are completely adapted after a century plus of evolving intellectual property. If we start changing that, they'll change exactly like international trade and firms' behavior change after we started the various GAAP, you know, the GATT rounds and changed the rules of international trade.
Okay, so we are really running out of time. So I would like to ask both of you 2 minutes closing statement on this debate.
Okay, so
I'll let Fred have the last word. No, Fred, let me have you. I talk more than you. I think the moral is very simple. The debate should move. I've been participating in a debate like this for about 20 years when we came out. I think we were the first, how can I say, traditional economists explaining that there is a very pragmatic social welfare argument against patents and copyright. And my concern is that, and the reason why I got bored, is that the debate never moves farther than this general skirmish. That there is a complete blockage of the actual debate, and the political world is impermeable to the issue because it's completely captured and controlled by the people that benefit from intellectual property. So if there is a room for advocate, consumer groups, lobbyists of any kind, political activists, whatever, is in trying to break that wall. in trying to get into the issue of how patents are legislated, regulated, deliberated, and copyright, and so on, and look sector by sector. There is no staying continuously at this level, which is too abstract, does not help. There is clearly need for reform. The insider resist it. I think the interest of the average citizen, the average consumer, is in the opposite direction. But it has to be, how can I say, turn into a specific debate sector by sector. You cannot go, there's no exact, and jurisprudence has realized, and judges have realized that you cannot have a uniform patent application across sector. De facto, the jurisprudence in the United States treats different sectors differently, even if the law should be equal for everybody else. The same has to be for reform, but we have to go a bit farther than the debate about Jefferson and Schumpeter. Otherwise, we will never improve the system.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Do you want to close?
Yes, a fantastic debate. Definitely consumers should be interested in getting products, newer products and cheaper products, and wider choice of products and services. And innovation is one of these drivers. Right now, at least to me, intellectual property seems to be one of the safeguards for continuous innovation, but it's not the gold standard. And I'm not saying we should inhibit other forms of innovation and monetization models. There are open source models, and sometimes the software domain, or like the software industry. You can see in the entertainment industry also models of monetizing, such as massive multiple online gaming companies, which are facing lots of piracy, and they were actually not able to enforce their copyrights on games for a long time. So for instance, game revolutions in terms of business models, such as World of Warcraft, where you have a monthly subscription, you can only play on the server if you really pay the money. So, but you get the game for free initially, shows that there are like innovative ways of doing this, and this can happen at the same time. So if there are better ways of being more innovative in bioscience and biotechnology, entrepreneurs will probably find ways to even work open source on biological and medical innovation. Probably in order to see this, we need to look at other market entry barriers and actual market entry barriers to research and also bringing like a medical drug or device to the market. And we just talked about different other drivers, such as regulation of the labor market, immigration, job cartels, and also the approval process, where if we would reform these, we might actually see competing business models, some with intellectual property and some without competing. And then the better model will probably win, because investors put their capital there, where, especially the venture capital, where they can potentially, where the market grows more, where you're more innovative, because as a venture capital, you're looking for the blockbusters. Yeah, but super interesting debate. Thank you so much, Professor Boldrin, for taking the time. I mean, you're a very distinguished scholar in this many of areas, but especially in this area. So it was highly interesting and educative also for me to have this fantastic chat with you.
Thank you as well. Very nice debate. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
And then thank you to Luca and the Consumer Choice for organizing it. Sorry.
Thank you, Michele.
No?
Well, thank you, everyone. And we will meet next week for a new webinar on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central European Time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.